Hi, everyone, and welcome to our third in the series of Ask the Experts. Today, we're focused on benefits and reporting considerations in response to COVID. As many of you have heard before, but as a reminder, we have a safe harbor about the information discussed during this webinar is based on best practices at Collaborative Solutions and on the information we have to date regarding rules and regulations. As the nature of the pandemic is changing and additional rules and regulations may be coming out in a regular manner, please make sure to consult your local, state, and federal authorities to make sure that regulatory resources are in compliance. And for those who aren't familiar with Collaborative Solutions, again, just high level, we are a finance, HR, and student transformation consultancy. We are very proud of our 800 plus Workday customers and 98% customer satisfaction rate. We have all-encompassing advisory services across strategy, as well as organizational change and training and post-go-live services. And what we're really proud of and we're offering today is our Workday experts. We have over 100 product leads, and we have a couple of them on the call with us today. So joining us today, we have Natalie Goshen, a manager in our HCM practice with over 12 years of functional HR experience, both as a customer and 9 years as a consultant. She specializes in benefits functional area and has assisted more than 40 customers with Workday implementations and post-go-live support. Peter has been in the Workday ecosystem for 6 years, spanning most functional areas, having done report writing for the past 3 years for HCM, finance, and student. Peter is a Workday reporting product lead. Jeff has been in HCM and reporting for over 14 years and has been in the Workday ecosystem for 6 and at Collaborative for 2 years, serving clients across all industries and geographies. And returning from some previous Ask the Experts, we have Aaron Finch, a senior manager in our organizational change and training practice, Blake Williams with over 14 years of IT consulting experience, Chuck Zarateras is a payroll consulting manager in our post-production practice, Karen Craig has almost 30 years of absence management experience. So as we know, benefits touches a lot of other areas in Workday, and we wanted to make sure that we brought the right experts to bear for you. So as we think about some of the things that we are seeing or hearing out there going on about benefits and reporting considerations, one of the things we've heard loud and clear is questions about benefits eligibility. Do your benefits eligibility rules need to change? Are there changes needed for both active and inactive or furloughed employees? And how are you handling life events for employees on furlough? Benefits communication is very important at this time. And the questions are your insurance carriers covering the cost of COVID-19 testing or treatment? And has that been communicated to your employees? And do your employees know their options for telemedicine? We're also seeing some choices in reducing their workforce through the use of early retirement. And questions are abound out there around whether or not that early retirement is going to also offer the opportunity for employees to return back to work, and what are those implications for benefits. And while this is typically the time of year that many organizations are looking at their benefits data and performing analysis to make decisions about vendors going forward for the next plan year and open enrollment, what data do you need to enable that decision making? And should you include or exclude data related to COVID-19? When we start talking about reports, we know there is a lot of new information, especially on the HR side, being documented on workers, whether they're remote, alternative locations, compensation changes, both increases and decreases, payroll tax changes, employee status. Now we have active, furloughed, terminated, retired, etc. What reports might need to be changed or new reports needed as a result of this? And on the financial reporting side, do you need to change your financial reports to accommodate changes in maybe spend categories associated with HR spend? Or do they need to be updated to accommodate changes in supplier spend? And frequently we're hearing about organizations modeling different financial outcomes as a result of the COVID-19. So do you need to create reports to enable that different modeling? As always, we've been talking about service delivery, governance, and adoption. I think from a service delivery, are you relying more or less on your benefits providers during this time? Does that change the relationship between vendor and centers of expertise or shared services? Is HR benefits designed to pick up the additional requests because of inactive, retired, terminated employees no longer having access to your systems? Are you tracking health data today that you weren't tracking before? And does that mean that your security model needs to be modified to support those changes in the data being gathered? And again, communication is oh so important. Communicating to your workers the changes in their benefits, everything from the impact to ACA and COBRA. How do we convey the information? How do we make sure they're getting the focus that it needs? And as we've talked about in the past, how you respond today can influence your business after recovery. We've seen a lot in the news about people paying attention to how employees are being treated by their workers, and that driving consumer behavior. So while we're focusing on the fundamentals right now, we'll go back to focusing on fringe and fun in the future, but that employee experience is going to drive that customer experience long term. So in response to this, please go ahead and use the question functionality in the webinar and let us know if you're in production or implementation and what functionality you're deploying, and let us know what questions you have. I will unmute you as I see the questions come up, and we'll make sure that we have the right expert available to answer your question. While we're waiting on questions, I'm going to go ahead and call on Blake Williams. I think, Blake, we've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks about the impacts to data changes and what you need to think about from a security model. Can you talk to us about any things that you've seen recently in the last couple of weeks, knowing that we have some new attendees that might be related to security?
Sure, Danielle. So I think there's a couple of things to think about when we look at the reporting and the overall data security. First of all, as we move into a more remote architecture, meaning, most, if not all of our folks are now working remotely, what does that do to our access and authentication policies? Meaning, what can they access from home and where are they running into any roadblocks on what processes they can complete where they used to do it in the office, where now they may need to do that remotely. The other side of that is potentially opening up Report Writer to more folks. So opening up some security where they may need access to information more readily available, meaning they need to respond to data more immediately than they did before. So having access to Report Writer may be something they're looking at expanding as well. One of the other things that we're looking at is also some more big picture data items on, as you said earlier, a lot of our customers are tracking a lot more data in Workday, but some of this may be outside of Workday, meaning how are we flagging essential versus non-essential, who are first responders. We know there's a lot of pieces in the government on how they can classify and apply for additional support based on this, where some of this may not be in Workday, and thinking about how we're going to get that data and merge it with Workday data so then we can have all of the information at our fingertips that we actually need. So I think there's a couple of areas we've been seeing there.
Thank you, Blake. I appreciate that. So we did have our first question come in from Carrie, who I'm going to unmute, but you are an in-production customer and you need help with furloughing employees and continuing their benefits. Natalie, can you help us?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So I'm Natalie, and we definitely have a lot of customers who are furloughing employees and need to possibly continue benefits for them. So that's definitely something that we can help with. And we've seen a lot of customers who are going through different processes. You might need to revise your business processes when you're doing these mass furloughs, and that's certainly something that we can help you with as a customer. We are definitely seeing a lot of that.
Great.
Carrie,
Thank
do you have a specific question?
Yes. So we were just thinking of putting in a leave plan, and we've kind of built that already, but then just worried about, we've been kind of taking their, because we already have done some of this, but how do we stop their benefits from being an employee deduction because we're covering them, for instance? So that was kind of, is there an easier way to do it than doing something on the payroll side?
Sure. So you mean you're just going to cover the cost of their benefits?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can certainly, move all of that cost over on a benefit plan side to the employer cost, and that way you're still tracking it. I think that we'll have to see how regulations are coming out and see how that is going to affect our ACA reporting in the future. But that's certainly something that you can do on the benefit plan side, is move over that cost to the employer. We could also work with payroll on the other side to maybe override that cost.
And that's what we've been doing right now. So we're just having, because it usually goes into arrears, but yeah, so I think it's just what's the best way to do it so that we are, because right now we probably shouldn't be just removing them kind of, so anyway, just trying to look at that. So yeah, I know it's also new. So, but yes, so that's kind of a problem for us, but thank you. Though that's an idea to create another benefit plan. And then I like that idea.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thanks.
And we have another question that just came in. And this comes from Marcella. Our organization is discussing furlough and as such the benefit impacts, specifically ending current coverages as needed. We are working to do this based on changing eligibility on an active leave type, which when on this leave, they are ineligible for coverages. We are using this to move them to a new benefit group where they are eligible for health, but ineligible for some insurances. We edited this at the plan level and designed the enrollment rules to allow no changes and autocomplete. Additionally, we configured a reinstatement event that restores the coverage and switches them back to normal original benefit groups. Are there any risks you can see with this approach?
So you'll certainly want to make sure that you are testing all of these approaches in your sandbox environment if you're already in production, or in an implementation tenant if you have one available. But that sounds like an accurate approach that you're taking. You're making them eligible for a new benefit group, and then you've edited your eligibility based on that. And you'll definitely want to also test that reinstatement event to make sure that we're returning them when they do return to all of their benefits that they had before.
Marcella, did that answer your question?
Yep, that's really helpful. And obviously we're going to be doing testing on the integrations as well. I just wanted to see if you had any hesitations with how we were approaching this fundamentally, because we're not taking the route of creating new benefit plans. In our particular setup, we're using this to cover costs, and we are doing that manually, because in typical behavior, business as usual, if somebody's on leave, they're cutting a check to payroll, and we don't actually touch their benefits like coverage history. They don't lose anything historically. So we're just kind of cutting that manual process of expecting them to pay, and our organization would be covering that cost directly. So thank you for that commentary. That helps me feel a little bit more positive about the approach we're pursuing.
Great, Marcella. And I love this. We actually have a comment based on some of the questions that we're getting. So I love seeing that we're sharing information here. Letitia said that on the current question, they created a leave type and added eligibility in the pay component to deduct. And as they're covering the costs, there aren't any arrears when returned, the deductions start and prorate as normal. Letitia, I'm actually unmuting you if you wanted to give any more clarity, if I probably butchered that answer a little bit more, but would love for you to share a little bit more on how you guys are facing this challenge.
Yeah, so can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, thank you.
So actually what we did is in order to not actually change any benefit configuration nor create new benefit plans, being that the length of furlough and how many furlough, etc., we were unsure, and since we are covering the cost, what we decided to do is we did create a leave type that had the traditional payroll effect, but that did not have a benefit effect and did not have an accrual effect. But what we did do is in our current configuration of all of our employee-based deductions, what we did is I added a line item to each of the worker eligibility in that deduction to just say if it's only for workers not on the furlough. So if you're not on furlough, the deduction keeps going. If you're on the furlough leave, the deduction is no longer eligible for you in the payroll side. So therefore, it doesn't go into the deduction and it doesn't go into arrears. And then we've already tested all our integrations to carriers. They still go over as eligible from the benefit side in their current coverages. We've also tested their return from leave and tested those deductions that they do automatically turn on. And since we do have prorating in our deductions, they prorate just as if a new hire had come in the 5th day of the month or the 10th day or anything like that, and they start back up as normal when they return. We wanted to do it this way just for the least amount of edit to our tenant based on obviously the amount of time we need, how quickly we need to do this. So I just wanted to comment, see if that helped anybody else.
And I think Marcella had a follow-up question about what you mean by line item. Marcella, I've unmuted you if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting approach. And I was just curious, when you say line item, where exactly are you configuring that line item on the deduction to indicate on your, what I'm assuming is on your payroll integrations for what remains active?
Yeah, so the actual, when you look at the particular deduction in your tenant, you have the run category eligibility, and then you have the worker eligibility. Sometimes it says, payroll input exists for pay component, or benefit percentage exists for pay component. Well, what we did is I added an additional comparison calculation in there to look at whether the employees were not on the furlough leave. So that's the line item I'm speaking of. I added an additional calculation to that pay component.
That's really interesting. Have you posted that anywhere on community?
No, I have not. We just yesterday kind of finalized and put the stamp of approval on it from our company perspective. That was our intent, but we made sure that our benefits team was okay and copacetic with all of it. But I will absolutely, I'm a Workday community advocate, so I always post stuff.
Yeah, I would love to see that. If you don't post it on community, I'd love to connect with you offline. I don't know if CS you'd be willing to share that.
We can coordinate. We absolutely can.
Yeah, awesome.
Oh,
Thank you.
absolutely, and I'd be totally willing to get on a call with you if you'd like. We are total community and networking advocates, so please feel free to give my information out if you'd like.
Thank you, Letitia. I appreciate that. I do. Blake actually has a question. Just he likes your approach as well, and just was wanting to ask a couple follow-up questions with you, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
Blake?
Yeah, that's interesting. I was curious to see, you said you're covering the employer portion of that. Are you also increasing the configuration to reflect that in their imputed income, any additional fringe impacts that may be happening downstream as well?
No, we actually did not touch our employer costs at all. We are actually from a money perspective, our carriers are just invoicing us for the cost of the employee cost. So we're paying it outside, but we did not do any configuring to our employer costs because they are still going to be done on the books as normal.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen similar to where employers would pick up additional costs for one reason or another. This is certainly the extreme scenario where it's going to be for everyone, but I've seen where that was increased, and they also increased the employer paid portion, so that could be reflected properly in at the reporting perspective, so you could see that by company, by department, what you needed, what was paid.
I see where you're going. Yeah, no, we didn't touch our employer. Our employer cost is going to continue, and our employee costs are going to be invoiced by our carriers. So we just removed the deductions completely from an arrears and from a deduction perspective through the eligibility.
Okay. No, I think that's a good idea. I think we're just calling anyone who wants to do that also think about what the impact potentially could be to show out. I know you're going to pay that and then be able to reflect that to the government that additional was paid, but so you could print that out on the worker level as well. So no, I like that. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that brings up a good question, right? As we're starting to see changes on these things, and from a communications perspective, Aaron, I was wondering if you wanted to share any thoughts on making sure that our employees or workers, former, active, et cetera, are getting the right information, and that we're communicating in such a way that, they're actually paying attention and getting value out of the communications that we're providing.
Yeah, Danielle, happy to speak to that, especially, benefits and pay. It's the two big areas that, it impacts everybody, and individuals are very interested, and, especially around uncertain times, they want the information, they want that reassurance that they know what to expect. So my first recommendation, and, Danielle kind of touched upon this without really meaning to, is make sure that you're considering all of your stakeholder groups and the ways that they need to receive information. So, you've probably got your regular employees. If you have contingent workers, if you have retirees, that access Workday, if you've got a global population that you consider, really put together a thought and some a plan into, how do we reach these different groups, and what's going to be most successful. Also, if you've got a group of people who don't report into an office, so maybe you've got an agent population or some other type of worker who is out in the field, think about the best way to reach them and include that in a communications plan so that you're not relying on one form of communication. And then the other thing that I would recommend is, really put some variety into how you're distributing information, even if it's the same message. So, if the message doesn't change, you're just providing that consistency. But, whether some people get information from email, if you can post it, if you're live on Workday and you can post it to your homepage as an announcement. If you've got the type of culture where communication is received very well from direct supervisors and managers, and you want to utilize those folks to cascade some information, put some thought into a toolkit and some key messages that you can provide your supervising staff and your managers so that the message is clear, the message is consistent, but it's coming from a reliable source. And then it doesn't fall to one source where people either, if they get it, great, but if they miss that particular piece of information, then they don't have any other way to go back. And then finally, I would say, really make known sort of your central repository for information and resources. So if something is changing because of your benefits plans or just kind of the current state of affairs with COVID, make sure that there's a lot of good documentation and resources out there for people so that they have something to go back and refer to. Because, I encourage everybody to remember that, it's a very stressful time for folks. And so a lot of times it'll take a couple of tries for information to stick and to be retained. And, you can really do a lot to help lessen that confusion and sort of lift the fog for people by hitting the messaging, a couple different times, using different sources, and then providing that repository so that folks can go back and they can easily find a detail if they need to go back and look at it later.
Thanks, Erin. I appreciate it. Yeah. I want to call on Jeff now while we're waiting for more questions. Jeff, I know that, working in production, we're getting questions from customers on reporting and impacts, and you guys have been working proactively to think about reports that are going to be needed in the future. Can you tell us a little bit about what we're seeing and hearing from a reporting standpoint across HCM and maybe the use of Prism or other systems? Hey, Jeff, I don't think we can hear you.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
We can.
All right. So yeah, a lot of the requests we're seeing have to do with reporting around new business process reasons or time off or leave reasons that they've set up specifically for COVID. So things like setting up, reports just on time off or leave based on those reasons, even termination reasons and alternate work schedules or salary reductions, and then even putting this stuff together on a dashboard. And not just related to benefits, but once you identify these employees in these ways, you can of course report on the benefits for these employees also.
That makes a lot of sense. Are we hearing a lot of questions about dashboards for managers or dashboards for the benefits team, or just dashboards in general from a variety of different areas?
HR and executives.
Okay, excellent. Well, now I'm going to call on your colleague, Peter, because Peter, I think this is where, we start to really see the overlap between our HR areas and finance, because obviously these changes in, paid paid types and leave plans and benefits impacts is really where we then start to see the impact on financial areas. So if you could give us a little bit of insight as to what you're hearing and seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big areas that we're seeing some focus right now is on worksheets, the ability to collaborate within Workday. So in the past, we would see customers using Google Sheets or SharePoint or other systems. I think now we're starting to set up for and see customers utilizing worksheets, because that gives live data right there in the tenant. People can take action on it, they can comment on it, and you can share it. And so it allows you to see that Workday data without having to pull it down from Workday and then act on it in another system. Specifically too on the financial side, right? So as all of these new benefit plans or time types get set up or leave plans get set up, we're seeing differences in the way those get coded to payroll result lines as well as to journal lines. So there's some special attention being put on doing quality check on the account posting rules, so putting together some reports to see how all these new transactions are posting and where they're going within the general ledger. So that was all I had on that question. Unless you have a follow-up question, sorry. Sorry, Danielle, I can't hear you.
Thank you, Peter. I just wanted to remind everybody, we also still have, people who have joined us from prior Ask the Experts, in case anybody does have questions on those leave types or those time off types and the impact of payroll, because as I mentioned earlier, I know that this is an area where we start to see a lot of overlap across our HCM benefits, payroll, time tracking areas and absence plans. So, if people are still, trying to get things configured for all of those types, please feel free to ask any questions in those areas as well. So I'm going to turn the table a little bit, and I'm going to ask a question and see if anybody can respond in the question area so that we can talk a little bit about how planning for the future is coming along. As we see, there are a lot of changes happening daily still, and we're starting to talk about, things like opening up some of the areas from a social distancing standpoint. There's questions about whether it's going to be state by state or region by region. As we start thinking about those things, just curious as to how many of you are already starting to plan for what the new normal looks like when we start to reduce our social distancing and get things a little bit closer back to what we are used to in the past. So has planning begun for your next steps? Would love to hear a little bit from you guys about what that looks like if you are. I think we may have everybody just really focusing on trying to get through the current challenges that we face, which I think we've heard a lot of that out there. Everything is too uncertain, and it's one day at a time. I completely understand, Marcella. Anybody else looking at things a little differently today? Or looking at it for differently in the future? Okay. And still no questions focused on anything, outside of benefits. So I just want to, make sure we leave the line open. I really appreciated the opportunity for, Letitia to give us some, insight as to how they were managing things and get that conversation and dialogue going. So if anybody else has some, unique ways that they're trying to, resolve some of these issues, please feel free to raise your hand and let us know. And we'd love to unmute you and let you share your experiences with the group here.
This is Carrie. I'm unmuting myself. I had the
Carrie.
question before about absence, but one thing that leave of absence. One thing that we did as a company, it's sort of unfortunate, but we removed vacation for a big portion of, well, for our US employees in Workday. And so that was very challenging. I don't know if that exactly fits into the scope of what we wanted to talk about today, but basically we had to remove the plan and we did pay out all the balances that were accrued, but we're no longer accruing vacation. So it was pretty challenging for me because we're pretty new to Workday and I'm new to the absence piece of it and our time off piece. But we did kind of, I guess you could say we inactivated our plan, but I had to, I was able to rely on Workday because they had office hours at the time to help me kind of walk through a couple things that I needed to do, but I needed to get it off of the calendar for people because all of the absences that were out there and requested or the time offs were still out there. And, as we would move into the next pay cycle, for some reason, they were still kind of going over there. So we did have to remove them. So it's kind of interesting to do something like that because it's not something typical. So that was an experience I had. I don't know if anybody else, unfortunately, had to do something like that, but that was a bigger project than I would have expected because it kept, we had to stop the accrual. We thought that would work, and then we just had to remove those absences from the calendar, and then we also paid it out, but we wanted to track that we paid out that vacation instead of just, that was accrued. So that was interesting, going in and loading those balances. So anyway, I don't know if anybody's had to do something like that, but it was definitely, it would have been helpful to work with somebody on that because we kind of had to complete steps that we didn't think about because we just didn't have the experience.
Karen, I'm going to call on you. Have we seen anybody else kind of take that approach with what they're doing and any, things to think about or, gotchas that we can, kind of tell Carrie to pay attention to or see if we want to share that as an idea out there?
Yeah, no, I think Carrie experienced her own gotchas and she got them all. I think we have seen similar things, not that exact scenario, but we have seen where we're switching from PTO accruals to more COVID related time off that can be tracked separately. And we've had some clients that want to keep that with one overall time off plan. So there has been some, creativity going on there. But I think, for definitely if you have to stop a certain plan, I think they went about it the right way. You have to effective end date any existing plans and accruals. And then you would have to do the request time off EIB to kind of back out any future time off requests is exactly the right way to go. But that's pretty much our experience for now. I'm happy to answer any other absence or leave related questions if anybody has them.
Thanks, Karen. I do see we have one person who is also appreciating Letitia's, advice earlier and would like your contact information. So we'll make sure that we get that out for people. He does say that we attempted a similar approach, but ran into an issue with payroll inputs still showing. So I don't know, Letitia, if you want to talk about, or maybe we can have Chuck or Karen talk about some of those payroll impacts. Letitia, I'll take you off of mute for now. And then Chuck, if you want to join as well. Letitia, I'm trying to take you off of mute. There you go.
Sorry, I didn't catch what you said. For some reason I muted my hearing as well. I'm sorry.
No worries. There's a question about somebody who used a similar approach to what you did, but ran into an issue with payroll inputs still showing. So I wanted to, have Chuck from our payroll team join, but if you had any thoughts on that, and then as I mentioned, we'll make sure we can share your information for people who have further questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. So yes, is the person stating that their ongoing payroll inputs show up? Well, yes. Your ongoing payroll inputs, unless somebody tells me otherwise, do not stop until you end them. So if the person has an ongoing payroll input or even a one-time payroll input, for that period, those will occur. So those payroll inputs need to be ended if they're ongoing, and the one-time payroll input would need to be removed because payroll
And Mike, I
input
went ahead and unmuted you if you want to ask more questions.
Perfect, thanks. This is Mike Vandenbrink. So what we were seeing, Letitia, was all the benefit inputs were still showing on the payroll input not process report, and I'm just fearful that when we change the eligibility rules again, that they're going to come back to haunt us in retro or something.
So we don't use inputs for our deductions. I might be a little lost or maybe misunderstanding where you're coming from. Our benefit deductions are just done from benefit costs through pay components. They're not in any payroll input line items.
So you're not using the benefits piece of Workday?
Yes, we are, but they go straight into prorated calculations in a deduction, not any payroll inputs of any kind.
Okay, maybe we can talk offline and I can show you what I'm seeing and maybe you can tell me what I did wrong.
No, absolutely. I mean, I'd love to look at what you're doing too.
Sure.
Well, I guess my question to the two of you is, are both of you also payroll customers?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so Chuck, I'll let you jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to second what Letitia was saying. It sounds like, if you're using payroll inputs, yes, the solution would not work. I guess I'm a little confused as well, because payroll inputs would be only if you didn't have the benefits module in play.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so what we're, let me see if I can bring up the report again real quick while on the fly here, but we are, as part of our payroll processing, each payroll or each pay cycle, they run an audit report that's payroll input not processed. And our report exploded with all of these benefits deductions that we had held in essence. So
yeah, maybe, and Chuck, you might know more about that. I mean, I'm the payroll supportee from an HRS perspective at my company, but like I mentioned, none of our deductions would have ever come up on a report such as that one because they're not, as quote unquote, using the right verbiage, they're not payroll inputs. They're coming directly from the benefit cost in the benefit module. So for us, we didn't have any payroll inputs that didn't process.
Yeah, I'm so super curious about.
Yes.
I completely agree with Letitia. Sometimes that report does blow up when you specify a pay group. So maybe try rerunning that report, put in the particular pay group you're looking for if you have multiple pay groups, and see what you get. I've seen some odd things. Yeah, those fields they don't have the red asterisk, they're not required, but if it's not there, then that report does do some funky stuff.
Everything's calculating properly, and it's not being withheld from the employee's paycheck as intended. It's just I'm a little and we're going to move forward with it, but I'm just a little concerned it's going to come back to bite us down the road somewhere somehow.
Mike, we will make sure to follow up with you and would love to connect,
Sure.
you and Chuck and Letitia to see if we can, take a look at what's happening and see what we can do to help.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Great.
Absolutely. We're curious, so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's connect.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I want to let everybody know that next week's Ask the Experts is going to focus on success for virtual deployments. And I say deployments, and that could be a lot of things, right? So for many of you who are in production, you may have had on your roadmap future functionality that you wanted to deploy, and there's a lot of questions about how that would look if you were doing a mainly remote deployment of new functionality. Some of you who are joining us haven't deployed yet and have questions about what a remote deployment would look like. So we'll be having some of our experts join us next week to focus more on those kinds of considerations about how to work successfully with your partners on getting those implementations or new functionalities or phase ones, deployed in a remote virtual environment. And then after that, we're going to start focusing on some finance areas. So we know that there are impacts to our organizations today based on finance challenges with supply chain, finance challenges, again, with some of the reporting that we've seen already. But we'll start to make sure that we have some open opportunities for your finance colleagues to also call in and do some SCS work. So I'm really excited to see us continue these open opportunities. And I will let you guys know if you're interested in other topics that we have not covered yet, please feel free to send an email to digitaltransformation@collaborativesolutions.com. And I will get those emails and start collapsing those to see, or consolidating those to see what future topics could be. So again, next week, virtual deployments, and then after that, we'll start focusing on finance. As always, we'll get a copy of this presentation posted as well as the FAQs, and we will work on connecting some of you soon. So with all that, I want to thank everybody for joining us again, and that's our third in a series.